The Lord Regent's greatest mistake was failing to kill Corvo. In just a single night, he'd removed Burroughs' strongest ally without even drawing blood. It begged to question what else could be done to tear down Dunwall's new leader, piece by piece. How about rescuing the one true heir to the Emperor's throne, Lady Emily, Corvo's daughter? From the journal carried by the ex-High Overseer, the Loyalists learned that Emily was being held at the Golden Cat. This was a brothel owned by the Pendleton twins, a pair of despicable aristocrats who supported Burroughs' new leadership. It was Trevor Pendleton who briefed Corvo personally. He was essentially ordering the death of his own brothers. He was still finding it hard to accept what had to be done. Nonetheless, he knew they must die for their endless cruelty and corruption. Emily was their priority, but the Pendletons had to go. The Golden Cat was no place for Lady Emily. She belonged on the Empire's throne, and Corvo was going to get her there. It was time for her rescue. Corvo returned to Clavering Boulevard. He'd barely been gone a day and already much had changed. The riverfront was no longer free to roam, as guards patrolled the rat-infested streets, a tense look in their eyes. Standing above them all, a watchtower bombarded anyone who trespassed. A group of weepers fell victim to Sokolov's latest toy. Corvo approached, staying out of sight, once again veering down Bottle Street. This time he noticed Granny Rags' apartment was boarded up. Corvo was pleased to be rid of her. She delayed his mission the day before, and put unsettling thoughts into his mind. He didn't think she was all that dangerous, but many had suffered for underestimating her. The less she was involved in Corvo's quest for revenge, the better. The gangsters were prowling outside the distillery. They surprised Corvo when they called him over. Their boss, Slackjaw, wanted a word. For a moment, Corvo wondered if they knew about his little poisoning incident Granny Rags asked him to do. If that were the case, he was sure they wouldn't be so welcoming. The distillery courtyard was quite bare. Any materials and supplies had been used to stop the building falling apart. It hadn't been in use for a few years now, first falling to the Hatter gang, before Slackjaw came along, who took the territory after a brutal gang war. Once inside, Slackjaw greeted him with respect. He could see the killer within Corvo, and rightly guessed he was off to kill the Pendleton twins. Therefore, he made a deal with Corvo. He knew his distillery had been affected, and the plague had spread to some of his men. Slackjaw didn't know who did it, but he pointed the finger at Dr. Gilvani. He was one of the residents of Clavering Boulevard, wealthy, and was developing his own elixir to fight off the plague, rivaling Sokolov himself. Slackjaw had sent a man to investigate but hadn't heard from him since, so Corvo paid another visit to the doctor's apartment. He entered the top floor, emerging inside the doctor's lab. Yesterday, Corvo had gathered infected rat tenants here. Today, he found Crowley, Slackjaw's missing man. He was dead, covered in blood. Apparently the guards had found him this way. Whoever the killer was, they hadn't been too careful, as Corvo found an audiograph, Crowley's last words. Returning to Slackjaw, Corvo gave him the audiograph, where they learned the Bottle Street gang were indeed being hunted. It seems they got to Crowley too before he could reveal who it was. Slackjaw's fears were confirmed. No matter, Corvo had done his part, and Slackjaw never goes back on a deal. He gave him a key. It was for the Captain's Chair Hotel, opposite the Golden Cat. From here, Corvo would get easy access to the rooftops. There was always a lot of security at the Golden Cat. Avoiding the street entirely would be very beneficial. But before setting off, Slackjaw had another offer for Corvo. Nearby lived an artist by the name of Buntings. Slackjaw's men had already broken into his apartment, but their prize was locked inside a safe. He knew that Buntings was already at the Golden Cat, and if Corvo got the combination from him, he would get rid of the Pendleton twins himself. Slackjaw promised he wouldn't kill them, but they would never be seen nor heard of again. Corvo was intrigued but suspicious, wondering if this gang leader could pull off something he himself intended to do. If anything went wrong, there could be consequences later on. Here he was again, deciding the fate of his enemies by using the hands of another. Stories tell of the utter cruelty shown by the Pendleton twins, showing no remorse for their violent actions, whilst avoiding all consequences. So corrupt they didn't even try to hide it. In a world so divided as Burroughs' empire, he doubted the world would be any worse off without the Pendleton twins. And as for Slackjaw, he may be a gang leader, but he was smart. Smarter even than some of the laws Corvo had met in the past. He offered no explanation for the Pendletons' fate, but was dead set on his deal. Anyway, Slackjaw clearly had a better idea of what the Pendletons had done in the past. That's reason enough to trust a man to deal out his own justice. Corvo agreed before leaving for the Golden Cat, to finally be reunited with Emily Coldwin. The district was a memory of Dunwall's great architects. The Golden Cat stood out amongst a sea of unusual apartments. Its copper domes and marble walls were a sight to behold. Looking out onto the Wrenhaven River, it invited the wealthiest lords and ladies from across the city. Were it not for the despicable patrons and the debauchery within, Corvo may even admire the place. He blinked from the top of the Captain's Chair Hotel across to a neighbouring apartment, onto the Golden Cat. An air vent lay open, and he crawled inside. Within was a labyrinth of rooms, but he soon found his way to Bunting. He sat in a private room, tied to an electric chair, an odd way to find pleasure. The Lord was blindfolded, and thought Corvo was one of the working girls. He gave Buntings exactly what he wanted. After several shocks from the chair, the Lord had grown suspicious after his safe word failed to work. It was then that Corvo revealed he wasn't a working girl. He demanded the safe combination, of which Buntings gladly gave. Satisfied, Corvo left him, still tied up. His side of Slackjaw's deal was done. Now for the most important task yet. He was to find Emily. Her whereabouts were a closely guarded secret. Burroughs wanted everyone to think she had been kidnapped by some villain. When the moment was right, the Lord Regent would save Emily and be seen as a hero. This meant she could not have been kept near the customers of the house. The only place fit to live far from prying eyes was a dormitory for the working girls. After stealing a key from the Madame of the Golden Cat, that is where Corvo went. No money had been wasted on decorating these hallways he found himself in. Devoid of personal effects, these rooms served only to house a poor staff. One of these rooms was locked, but luckily the Madame's key worked. He pushed open the door, and the sight before him filled him with a sense of overwhelming nostalgia and relief. He remembered watching Emily play at Dunwall Tower, always getting in everyone's way yet loving every second. All those times playing hide and seek, teaching her swordplay and letting her win. He remembered all the drawings she would create, proudly showing everyone who would come by, servants or lords. Deep down, Corvo was terrified these past few months had changed Emily. He was scared that losing her mother and believing her father was dead would traumatize her. She was still so young that she could have ended up believing the lies of Burroughs and the Pendleton twins. If this was the case, who knows what sort of empress she would grow up to be. But the scene before him made him shed a tear. At the back of the room, the furniture had been made into a fort fit for a child destined to do great things. This was still the Emily Corvo knew, the Emily Corvo loved. She heard the door open, expecting the Madame, but saw a stranger. The dark coat, sheathed weapons and skull-shaped mask didn't even make her flinch. So very brave. He removed his disguise and knelt down with open arms. Emily was overjoyed to see her father, and they embraced. She had so many questions. She thought Corvo was dead like Jessamine. It could all wait. For now they needed to escape. But it turns out, Emily had nearly succeeded twice already. She knew of a VIP entrance hidden from public eyes. It led straight back to Clavering Boulevard. He followed Emily, but said she would meet him by Samuel's boat, allowing Corvo to pay one last visit to Slackjaw. Through the VIP access, Corvo met someone he was not expecting to find. Granny Rag skulked in her new hole, surrounded by rats. Perhaps the Bottle Street gang had finally evicted her, or maybe she preferred to stay on the move. But wherever she went, the rats followed. This time she did not offer any runes, just madness. Corvo returned to Bottle Street, and gave Slackjaw the combination to Bunting's safe. In return, the gang leader revealed his plan for Morgan and Custis Pendleton. They owned silver mines where hundreds met their grisly end. Workers died of starvation, exhaustion. Some were crushed by falling rocks, others by inhalation of dangerous gases. No matter what, the Pendletons didn't give a damn so long as their profits remained high. Slackjaw was going to put the Pendletons in the very cruel world they had created. He would shave their heads and cut out their tongues so no one would know who they really were. That's where they would spend the rest of their days. This seemed like a comparable end to Campbell's exile. Two lords living a life of luxury, only to lose it all in a day. Was it a just punishment? Corvo couldn't truly say. All he knew was that Morgan and Custis Pendleton were in league with Hiram Burroughs. For that reason alone, they would object to Emily's leadership after the Lord Regent was gone. They returned to the Houndpits pub. Emily seemed to be happy to be free, naive to the troubles of the world. Upon docking, Everyone was waiting to greet her. They bowed respectfully and introduced themselves to Emily. Callisto would take responsibility to look after her. Havoc also showed his respects. I couldn't have been happier with how things were turning out. So far, Burroughs had lost his support from the Abbey. Now with the Pendleton twins gone, their votes in Parliament would move to Trevor, who would then oppose the Lord Regent. Now they had Emily, their legitimacy would grow as well. The strongest allies of Hiram Burroughs now faced fates worse than death. They had also ruined his plans to use Emily as a way to gain public's favour. Burroughs had few allies left, but the Loyalists had already found the next target. From Campbell's journal, they had also learned that Burroughs' mistress was incredibly wealthy and helped to fund his regime. Crippling this source of income would be the final blow the Loyalists needed before taking out Burroughs himself. The problem was, they didn't know who the mistress was. All they knew was that a portrait had been painted of them by none other than Anton Sokolov, the royal physician. They capture him and they find out who Burroughs' mysterious mistress is. A reunion overdue, a great step closer to redemption. The Loyalist plan is all coming together. For once, the future doesn't look so bleak. The royal physician had a brilliant mind when it came to the wonders of the world, but less so with choosing the right side. With either kind words or cold steel, Corvo would get the answers he needed. Please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.